don't know whether I was supposed to have a specific theme with this lesson, so I don't. If I was, I will hear from Micah later about that. So we're just doing a one-off lesson this morning in the book of Proverbs. So Proverbs chapter number 1. And specifically what I want to talk about this morning is going to be the subject that we'll see in verse number 20. Let's go ahead and read the passage first, and we'll get into the introduction. So Proverbs chapter number 1 and verse 20. It says, "Wisdom crieth without, she uttereth her voice in the streets. She crieth in the chief place of concourse, in the openings of the gates. In the city she uttereth her words, saying, How long, ye simple ones, will ye love simplicity? And the scorners delight in their scorning, and fools hate knowledge. Turn you at my reproof. Behold, I will pour out my spirit unto you. I will make known my words unto you." I want to specifically talk about the subject of wisdom in the streets this morning. And in the idea that the book of Proverbs is essentially teaching us that everywhere around us we can gain wisdom. You can take a walk down the street, you can observe things around you, and you can gain wisdom from those things. And we should be wise, we would be wise, to take note of these things. Now, I'm also preaching a sermon tonight that I'm going to be talking about basically looking at people in the same way that God looks at people. And essentially, in general, I'm going to be talking about we should love people, we need to care for people, we need to be merciful to people, we need to be gracious to people.
Amen.
On the same note, though, when you see somebody that, this isn't one of the examples I'm going to get into this morning, but that's been the same guy sitting on the side of the road at an intersection begging for 2 years for people to, give him money or whatever else. He can walk around perfectly fine. He's able-bodied and he can work. You can think about that person as a soul and love them and wish that they would be saved. But you can also look at them and gain some wisdom from that and understanding that I don't want to live that way. I don't want people that I love and care about to live that way. So what wisdom can I glean from that situation so that that doesn't happen to me? As Christians, we should be able to look at situations in both perspectives, where we love people and we care about people, but we also can look at just the wisdom that's crying out in the streets to us so that we don't have the same pitfalls and mistakes in our lives that other people have had. So let's just look at a few different examples throughout the book of Proverbs. So the first one I want to talk about, Proverbs chapter number 23. Proverbs chapter 23. The subject of alcohol. Now, if you look down in verse number 29, it says, "Who hath woe? Who hath sorrow? Who hath contentions? Who hath Babylon? Who hath wounds without cause? Who hath redness of eyes? They that tarry long at the wine, they that go to seek mixed wine. Look not thou upon the wine when it is red, when it giveth his color in the cup, when it moveth itself aright. At the last it biteth like a serpent, and stingeth like an adder. Thine eyes shall behold strange women, and thine heart shall utter perverse things. Yea, thou shalt be as he that lieth down in the midst of the sea, or as he that lieth upon the top of the mast. They have stricken me, shalt thou say, and I was not sick. They have beaten me, and I felt it not. When shall I awake? I will seek it yet again." So alcohol is something that I think we can look at in our society, and we can look at scriptures in the Bible that teach us about these things, and we can understand the damage that it can cause. But we can also just look out in the world today at the damage that alcohol causes to families, that it causes to our society. And the issue is with alcohol is that the marketing campaigns that these places do are just so good, and they make it look like it's so much fun. And you go out to a restaurant like Texas Roadhouse, for example, And it's like 50% of the decorations in Texas Roadhouse are for a different beer company, a different beer sign. And you might not even really notice it because your favorite sports team is the main logo, but then it's just down, there's a little tag ending of Miller Lite or someone else that's sponsoring the design itself. And it's like every single light that's there, there's some level of advertisement for like the special margarita that you can get, and then there's the menu, but then there's a whole other menu that is way more appealing when it comes to looks than the actual menu with the food is. And it's got way more colors on it and way more drinks on it, and it looks more exciting to get all of the alcohol. And so it looks exciting, but look what the Bible says in verse number 32. It says, at the last, it biteth like a serpent and stingeth like an adder. It's not that, don't misunderstand what I'm saying, but it isn't that, these companies are just completely lying because, maybe, that first drink, people have a lot of fun and, they're really enjoying themselves and things like that, but then they keep on drinking over and over and over again. And it isn't that first sip, it's all the sips that follow it. And then at the last, it biteth like a serpent and stingeth like an adder. And then what happens after you've been drinking it? It says, thine eyes shall behold strange women, and thine heart shall utter perverse things. Yea, thou shalt be as he that lieth down in the midst of the sea, or as he that lieth on the top of a mast. They have stricken me, shalt thou say, and I was not sick. They have beaten me, and I felt it not. When shall I awake? I will seek it yet again. And really what we're reading about here is just someone that's just a perpetual alcoholic. And just that every single day, this is their life, that they wake up, they drink alcohol, they seek the bottle, then they get really drunk, they seek strange women, they utter perverse things, they get beat up, essentially what it's saying, you're not even aware of it, and then you wake up the next day and you feel all the effects of it, but it's like to drown out the effects of it, you just go seek the bottle. And there's so many people, there are millions of people in this country, there's people in our town this way. I'm sure many of us can think about someone in our family or distant family this way, where somebody like this. That's just their whole entire life is this cycle right here, where it's just alcohol, several problems that come from alcohol, more alcohol to drown those problems out. And it's a never-ending cycle where they're just in it over and over and over again. Sometimes it comes in the form of, a hard liquor. Sometimes it comes in the form of just, a bunch of beer or whatever else. But regardless of what it is, we as Christians, again, number one, we should love those people. We should care for those people. We should treat them gracefully. We should have mercy upon them the same way that Jesus had mercy on us. But we also, when dealing with situations like this, need to have the wisdom and need to have the knowledge to look at a situation like that and understand the damage that something like alcohol can cause and not partake in that and not have that in our lives. You can still love people. You can still care for people that are in those types of situations, but you need to be wise enough to understand that you're not any better than that guy, and that guy at one point just picked up the bottle and just drank over and over and over again and got himself stuck in this cycle. You don't want to be that person. Maybe you can think, well, I'll just take one drink and it's not going to be that big of a deal. Maybe it won't be for an extended period of time, but what about the time that you get a little bit too drunk and then you wake up the next day and you seek it again. It's an over cycle. No one, when they take their first drink, decides, I just think that I want to be an alcoholic with my life and I want to wake up every single day and, be in this cycle of misery and pain and sickness and everything else that it brings. And don't think what I'm saying, oh, it might not be that bad at the first drink, and I'm excusing drinking it at all. I'm saying the logic and the excuses that people try to say when they justify drinking alcohol is, well, it isn't that big of a deal if I just have one drink. Well, it is that big of a deal if we have that one drink. The Bible teaches us that we're supposed to be sober-minded. And there are several examples all across the Bible of stories just like this, where we as Christians are supposed to look in the Bible and understand, hey, this isn't something that we should be partaking in. This isn't a good idea. These are all of the consequences of it. So here's a specific example in the Bible. And this is just another example where the Bible is such a timeless book, because then you can look out in society and you can see the exact same situation play out. I'm sure many of us have seen it with loved ones or our personal lives or things like that. And if you haven't, praise God for it, because it's nothing that you want to see, and especially someone that you love going through. But it is a very, very dangerous thing. And if we're going to be mindful and we're going to pay attention to the wisdom that's crying out in the streets, alcohol is certainly one of those things that we can look out from the Bible, and that we can look out in the streets and understand this is not something that we should pursue. This is not something that we should partake in. Proverbs chapter number 7. Proverbs chapter number 7. Now, in Proverbs chapter number 7, and then we're going to look at one other passage as well, we hear about the strange woman. Now, actually, hold your place in Proverbs chapter 7 and go back to Proverbs chapter number 1. And look in verse number 8, where it says, "My son, hear the instruction of thy father, and forsake not the law of thy mother, for they shall be an ornament of grace unto thy head, and chains about thy neck." And then we're going to actually get into the rest of this passage later, but again, he refers to my son. Now, it's important to understand that the book of Proverbs is basically written by King Solomon, obviously through God, but it's written to his son. So when you're reading about the strange woman, it's because this is targeted towards his son. Now, the strange woman, if you're a woman, could also just be the strange man. You know, I don't think the Bible really talks about the strange man. It's written to his son, so it wouldn't necessarily make sense, regardless of what I'm going to tell you today. But there is certainly, a message here that can be gleaned, but really what you should just understand is this lifestyle and these actions, regardless of whether you're a man or a woman, they both apply to you. And in general, it's just promiscuity. And promiscuity, again, is something that seems exciting and fun on the outside. It seems like a cool thing to be involved in. But at the end, it's pain, and it's suffering, and it's just a horrible situation, something you would have been better off avoiding. So look in Proverbs chapter number 7 and verse number 6. It says, "For at the window of my house I looked through my casement, and beheld among the simple ones, I discerned among the youths a young man void of understanding, passing through the street near her corner, and he went the way into her house. In the twilight, in the evening, in the black and dark night, and behold, there met him a woman with attire of an harlot and subtle of heart. She is loud and stubborn, her feet abide not in her house. Now she is without, now in the streets, and lieth in wait at every corner. So she caught him and kissed him, and with an impudent face said unto him, I have peace offerings with me. This day have I paid my vows. Therefore came I forth to meet thee, diligently to seek thy face, and have found thee. I have decked my bed with coverings of tapestry, and with carved works, with fine linen of Egypt. I have perfumed my bed with myrrh, aloes, and cinnamon. Come, let us take our fill of love until the morning. Let us solace ourselves with love. For the goodman is not at home. He is gone a long journey. He hath taken a bag of money with him, and will come home at the day appointed." So she's essentially saying, my husband's not home. Come with me, and we'll have our night together of love. And in verse number 21, it says, "With her much fair speech she caused him to yield. With the flattering of her lips she forced him. He goeth after her straightway, as an ox goeth to the slaughter, or as a fool to the correction of the stocks, till a dart strike through his liver, as a bird hasteth to the snare, and knoweth not that it is her life. Hearken unto me now, therefore, O ye children, and attend to the words of my mouth. Let not thine heart decline to her ways, go not astray in her paths. For she hath cast down many wounded, yea, many strong men have been slain by her. Her house is the way to hell, going down to the chambers of death. So again, it seems like this enticing thing. It seems like a good thing. It seems like an exciting thing, but it's not. And at the end, out in the street talking about it, the actual act itself, it seems like this fun thing. But at the end, and it's over, there's so much damage done that you can't really recover from that. You can recover from it, and God's grace and mercy can be found in any situation. I personally know of people, obviously, very obvious reasons, wouldn't get into specifics or details of things like that, but I know of situations where God has been merciful through those and, helped people work through those things and save their marriages. But, it's one of the worst things because it just seems so good in that moment of time and just causes, in many cases, irreparable damage and, fallout that just can't be recovered from. It isn't worth it. And it seems like this fun thing. It seems like this exciting thing. But we should be able to understand from the Bible, first of all, this is never something that we should do. Adultery is a horrible, horrible thing. Promiscuity, if you're not married, is not something that you should ever seek to be involved in. You will only find pain and suffering at the end of it. It's regardless of what our culture is doing today, regardless of how much our culture wants to seem like promiscuity is not a bad thing or that it's actually somehow an empowering thing or fun. It isn't empowering. It's not fun. It causes horrible damage to people that they're really going to have a hard time the older they get dealing with that, coping with that, understanding that. And as Christians, we can have the grace and mercy to love people and care about people, but we certainly should avoid any situation like this at all costs, regardless of how fun something might seem, regardless of the potential reward of one night might seem. Every night after that, every day after that, is misery and pain. I love the way that this is phrased, where it talks about an ox going to the slaughter, a fool to the correction of the stocks, till a dart strike through his liver, as a bird hasteth to the snare, and knoweth not that it is for his life. Many times when you walk through that door, you cannot walk back out of it the same person. It stays with you every single day for the rest of your life, and God can forgive you, and maybe your spouse can forgive you, but it's a stain. And it's not something that you want. Your life is worse because of it, regardless of the experience that you enjoy for one night. The pleasures of sin, they seem good for a season, but they will not be forever. I love the saying about, sin takes you farther than you're willing to go, keeps you longer than you're willing to stay, and costs you more than you're willing to pay. This is a perfect example of that. It seems like an enticing thing. It seems like a fun thing. But in the end, it's going to be a world of pain. Proverbs chapter number 9, another similar story. Verse number 13, Proverbs chapter 9, it says, "A foolish woman is clamorous, she is simple, and knoweth nothing. For she sitteth at the door of her house, on a seat in the high places of the city, to call passengers who go right on their ways. Whoso is simple, let him turn in hither. As for him that wanteth understanding, she saith to him, Stolen waters are sweet, and bread eaten in secret is present, but he knoweth not that the dead are there, and that her guests are in the depths of hell." And again, going along with our theme of the idea of wisdom being out in the streets, this is an example where we should be able to be wise and understand these things. And I just want you to notice what this says specifically, and maybe translate a little bit. Verse number 13, it says, "A foolish woman is clamorous, she is simple, and knoweth nothing." This is a stupid woman. Excuse me for just saying what the Bible is saying here. So he's just saying clearly, she's foolish, she's simple, she doesn't know anything. So this is the woman. And what does she do? She sits at the door of her house on a seat in the high places of the city to call passengers who go right on their ways. What's the audience? Whoso is simple, let him turn in hither. As for him that wanteth understanding, she saith unto him. So who's the audience? Simple people. All right? People that have no knowledge. The same exact type. It's a foolish woman. It's a foolish man. It's simple people all across the board. They don't understand the consequences of their actions. They think about what's right in front of them at that time. They don't have the comprehension to understand all of the consequences that are going to follow. They don't understand how bad they're going to be hurt by what they're about to do. It's simple people that fall in line with this. How do you protect yourself against something like this? Be wise and understand and recognize these things before you come into pass with them. Before you see the promiscuity, whether you're a man or whether you're a woman, and you see these things out in society, you see them on social media, you see whatever, you need to have the wherewithal to recognize the foolishness of entering into something like that based on all of the things that you can see in real life of this promiscuity and the damage that these types of adulterous affairs cause. If you're wise to that, you're not going to fall to that. It doesn't mean that it's just this guarantee, I'll never do anything. Obviously, we need to continuously be walking in the Spirit. We need to continuously be trusting in God, working on these things. But this is not something that wise people fall into. This is foolishness. This is something that no one should ever do, that no one would ever think to do. That's a wise person, because a wise person isn't just thinking about the one moment. A wise person thinks about that moment, and they think about the consequences of that moment. But so many people today just want to live their entire lives by the pleasures of that day. They never want to experience the consequences that come because of those. And many people think, well, there can just be a reset button and I just absolve myself from those consequences, or I find a way, or I find a reason that I'm not going to be accountable for them. And I don't know if it's just this thing, we just have this generation that grows up and they're so used to playing video games. And I'm speaking to my own generation too. You're so used to playing video games, and you mess something up, you can just pause, reset the game, or exit the game, or restart, or whatever. Real life doesn't work that way. You go make a serious mistake, whether that's a financial mistake, whether that's a horrible mistake like this with the drunkenness or adultery or whatever else. That stuff sticks with you. Your life doesn't have a reset button. You don't have the ability to just absolve yourself from the consequences of your actions. These are things that foolish people are doing. And if you want to be wise, you've got to stop being simple to these things. You have to be wise to these things and understanding that, hey, no, the house of the strange woman, the house where the promiscuity is happening, the house where these adulterous affairs are happening, they're not fun. In verse number 18, but he knoweth not that the dead are there, and that her guests are in the depths of hell. This isn't a place that you want to go. This is a bad place, and maybe the outside of the house looks fun, but the inside of the house is somewhere that you're going to have a really, really hard time coming out of. Proverbs chapter number 24. We've looked at alcoholism. We've looked at promiscuity, adulterous affairs. Proverbs chapter number 24 and verse number 30. How about being wise to laziness? Proverbs chapter 24 and verse 30 says, I went by the field of the slothful, and by the vineyard of the man void of understanding. And lo, it was all grown over with thorns, and nettles had covered the face thereof, and the stone wall thereof was broken down. Then I saw and considered it well. I looked upon it and received instruction. So this is very clearly an example and a good exercise that you can go through in understanding how to put this into practice. It's just, you think about the setting, you're just walking along. Today maybe we don't walk too much, we're driving in our cars, but maybe you're just driving down your car down the road, and he sees this setting where he sees a vineyard of a man that's void of understanding. It says, and lo, it was all grown over with thorns, and nettles had covered the face thereof, and the stone wall thereof was broken down. Then I saw, so notice, you see, you consider it well, you look upon it, and you receive instruction. We should be able to, with all of the different examples and all the wisdom that's crying out in the street, to look at things that happen in real life or that we see in real life and be able to look on them and receive instruction. He's not going to this guy and saying how awful he is. He's not, trying to steal from him or put him down in any way. But it's just this ability to look and observe things that are going on around us and receive instruction from them. And notice this is what the instruction is in verse number 33. Yet a little sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the hands to sleep, so shall thy poverty come as one that travaileth, and thy want as an armed man. So he's basically saying that this guy is a man void of understanding, and that he's got this vineyard, and that it's completely overgrown with all of these thorns, and that the stone wall that was there at that vineyard is broken down now. And his instruction is basically, a little sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the hands to sleep, so shall thy poverty come as one that travaileth, and thy want as an armed man. And essentially just saying he's lazy. It isn't that he's saying, oh, well, you can just never sleep or never do anything like that. When you've got something that you're supposed to be taking care of, and then it's all overgrown with thorns, and it's just not going to function as a vineyard anymore because all of the thorns are going to choke up everything that you're trying to grow, then you can just understand that there was obviously laziness, and that man wasn't taking care of the things that he had. And I think today we see a lot of laziness. We see people that don't want to work, or they don't want to work hard. And I think that there's a lot of challenges that people go through today. I think that there's a lot of things that are really expensive. I mean, just being a husband and provider of a family of 5, soon to be 6, it's pretty expensive to have a family today. It's expensive to own a home. It's expensive to buy groceries and feed. I remember when we first got married, I think that Janae was able to get by going to the grocery store maybe around $100 a month, just for both of us. This was back in 2018. I couldn't imagine a month where we spend $100. I could imagine a few days that only cost $100 in terms of feeding our family. So it's expensive, and we can't deny that. But if you're a provider in your family, circumstances don't necessarily matter. All right, if things are really, and this is one of the things that while I empathize a lot with, people that, especially in my generation that kind of sit back and look at expenses, and it's like, the income they're going to get, how much it costs for, just education, and then what it costs just to survive and things like that. And I think that it's not a far-fetched to say that there is a very extreme affordability crisis in America, and that people have a hard time just paying for general expenses, and it's hard. But what I would say is that just because it's hard doesn't mean that you're just absolved from having to provide for your family anymore. And just because it's hard doesn't mean that you don't still need to work, and that your kids still don't need to be fed, and that you shouldn't just rely on somebody else to do that. If you have to work harder to provide for your family, I'm sorry, but grow up and provide. That's it. You don't get to just say, well, circumstances are much more difficult today, or I've got it different than someone did 50 years ago. It doesn't matter what someone 50 years ago had. It's the fact that you today have a family, you have people to provide to, regardless of the circumstances. If that means you have to work 100 hours a week, then you have to work 100 hours a week. You have people to take care of. And it shouldn't, yes, I would hope that things get better. I'd like for things to get easier. I'd like for prices to come down. I'd like for, groceries not to cost hundreds of thousands of dollars over the course of a year. But that's what it is. There's no way around it. So we, as providers, as men, or if you're a woman that's working and also providing for your family, you have to just recognize this is the challenge that's before you today. You don't get to be absolved from it and just say, well, things are just hard today, so I get an excuse and I don't have to do this. No, you absolutely do. You do have to provide for your family. You do have to take care of your family. What's going to happen if you don't? So shall thy poverty come as one that travaileth, and thy want is an armed man, where you're basically just going to be lost and you're not going to have anything. And it's not like life is just about gathering things, but life certainly has a lot to do with taking care of your family and taking care of the things that you have. That's not just an Old Testament concept. That's a New Testament concept as well, that you need to work or you shouldn't eat. And just because things are hard, just because things are expensive, doesn't mean that we are absolved from having to take care of families and taking care of those around us. So just to close out here very quickly, go back to Proverbs chapter number 1. In verse number 10, this goes kind of right along with this. I remember back in 2020 when it just seemed like every city in the United States of America was burning down, and there were all these protests and were robbing and looting stores and things like that. It was just a really dark time. I thought a lot about this passage right here. Proverbs chapter number 1, where it said, "My son, if sinners entice thee, consent thou not. If they say, Come with us, let us lay wait for blood, let us lurk privily for the innocent without cause, let us swallow them up alive as the grave, and whole as those that go down into the pit. We shall find all precious substance, we shall fill our houses with spoil. Cast in thy lot among us, and let us all have one purse. My son, walk not thou in the way with them, refrain thy foot from their path, for their feet run to evil, and make haste to shed blood. Surely in vain the net is spread in the sight of any bird, and they lay wait for their own blood, they lurk privily for their own lives. So are the ways of every one that is greedy of gain, which taketh away the life of the owners thereof." A common response to the issue that I was just talking about when it comes to how difficult things are to be afforded, and just stuff is so expensive, and groceries are expensive, and healthcare is expensive, and housing is expensive, and I can't find anything that isn't expensive. I think that TVs have gone down in price. Like if you remember, when flat screen TVs first came out, they're way cheaper than they were back then. You can go to Walmart and get a massive flat screen TV for a pretty cheap price. It might not be as high quality as one of these super 4K OLEDs or whatever else you're going to get at Best Buy. But as someone that works with technology, I can't even tell you how many hours a week. I don't know the difference between one of these $2,000 TVs and the $400 ones. So, your TVs are cheaper, so congratulations there. Everything else is more expensive. But so people respond with, there's two ways you can respond. Either you solve the problem yourself, you deal with it yourself, or you look for somebody else to solve the problem. Or you get involved in something like this, which is basically where all of these people, and he literally just says, "My son, if sinners entice thee, consent thou not. They say, Come with us, let us lay wait for blood, let us lurk privily for the innocent without cause." And it's just, let's all gang up together and go in and, take all these things, and we'll all just split it all together. We'll rob a Walmart, we'll rob a Best Buy, we'll get all this stuff, and then we'll have a bunch of money, and it'll work out that way. It doesn't work out. You're going to go to jail. You're going to suffer the consequences. And when you look at people that were, doing any of that, and, rioting or burning down Target or stealing, the cheap TVs back then, it didn't get them anywhere. It doesn't solve any problem. It makes things worse. And when you go to some of these cities now, we experience this being around Chicago, where you just go into a store and literally to buy a bottle of shampoo, you've got to go get the cashier to unlock the cabinet for you because so many people just come in and steal the stuff. And that's common in a lot of these places because it's just a low trust society at that point, and people can't handle purchasing a bottle of shampoo that's $3. And so a lot of this stuff, in general, we just looked at a few different examples this morning, and I don't want you to just think about a few examples. Don't just think about these things. Think about the principle. Really what we did this morning was almost like an exercise of looking through specific things and specific examples of, very obvious ones, like alcohol, like the strange woman, like laziness, or don't be a part of a mob, or things like that. All of these things we can think about and recognize obvious answers to. The lesson, though, is the idea that wisdom crieth out in the streets, and it's all around us. Really, there's a lot of times when you're reading through the book of Proverbs where it's like every single verse is just a completely different subject, and it's a new thing. And what it is just observations of things that are going on around and the wisdom that you can glean from them. So, yes, be merciful to people. Yes, love people. Yes, be gracious to people. But on the same page, also be wise to understand circumstances that people get into in life so that you and loved ones can avoid those same pitfalls. And there's nothing wrong, by the way, of recognizing that you've made a lot of foolish mistakes. Is there anybody in this room that doesn't feel like they've ever made some ridiculous mistake in their life? It doesn't have to just be sin. Or, I can think of many very wild financial decisions that I made when I was 18 years old that I just wish that I would not have done that. But I think it's inevitable. I think everybody does it. But we can look at things that we've done in our own lives too, and be introspective and understand wisdom that you can gain just from your own mistakes and your own things you've done. So really think about this thing. Wisdom is all around us. It's crying out in the streets, begging to be understood. And only the simple and the foolish want to disregard those things and not pay attention to them. So very much think on these things. The book of Proverbs is a good thing to read regularly and understand these different wisdom and truths that you can gain from them. But let's close in a word of prayer before we dismiss. Father, thank you so much for all you've done for us, Lord. Thank you for your clear word that teaches us these things. I pray that you just be with us today in these services, that your name will be glorified ultimately, Lord. I pray that you'd help us to draw close to you. Thank you, Lord, for all you've done for us. In Jesus' name, amen. Dismissed.